And that jarring cacophony tells you you're listening yet again to the Power of Three podcast, the podcast that likes to put on a performance every single episode. I'm Kenny Smith. Why are we going for a theatre allegory? Well, it's quite obvious really, because we're talking about Theatre of War today, which was the 26th novel of the New Adventures novel range. It was written by Justin Richards and was published on the 19th of May 1994, a month before my 20th birthday, for those interested, with a cover by Jeff Cummins, and featured the 7th Doctor, Bernice Summerfield, and of course, Ace. The cover kind of gives that away. Talking of the cover, if you take a look at it, you'll find that it's got what appears to be Ace, but turned into stone or mud, looking all dry and cracked, with her hands outreached, looking towards the reader with a smile on her face. It's a bit of a sinister smile. As we turn the book over, the text tells us, "Hamlet, thou hast thy father much offended." Ace stared at the Doctor. He nodded. "Yes, Ace, we're in Elsinore, and I don't like it either." 5 years ago, an archaeological expedition came to Manaxus to explore the ruins of an ancient theatre. All but one of the visitors died horribly, and the planet was abandoned, bathed in lethal radiation. Now, the only survivor has returned, determined to uncover the theatre secrets, whatever the cost. Among her archaeological team is a certain Professor Bernice Summerfield. Soon, the deaths begin again, while the front line of an interstellar war moves even closer. Desperate for help, Bernice tries to summon her companions, but when the TARDIS lands on the planet, the Doctor finds himself participating in a frighteningly real performance of Shakespeare's greatest tragedy, and he begins to realise that the truth about Manaxus may be far stranger than anyone imagines. At the core of this story is the lost script, The Good Soldier, which of course leads to parallels with Doctor Who missing episodes, and indeed the lost Shakespeare scripts. But we got that on TV, so we know what happens in Love's Labour's 1 in Gareth Roberts' The Shakespeare Code with the 10th Doctor and Martha. But yes, it makes for an interesting listen when you compare it to missing episodes and thinking, yes, we get that. And now, to kick off today's episode, we're going to hear the prelude to Theatre of War, which appeared in Doctor Who magazine and was written by Justin Richards. And this is read for us by James Hadwin Bennett. Over to you, James.
Source document. Clissolan's account of the Pentalanian festival on Manaxus. The entire festival took place before an invited audience in the Pentalanian Theatre. As Ecclesian ambassador, I was fortunate to be present at a performance of Burgabe's The Hanged Man, which was, in this writer's opinion, one of his most triumphant works. The play started exactly at 1400 hours, and was enhanced considerably by the setting, with the Drapanth Mountains visible in the distance as the afternoon suns shone off their western slopes at the start of the play. The play itself concerned a man whose entire life, his destiny, is mapped out at birth by the gods. He cannot help but play the role written for him in the heavens, a role which culminates in his tragic and undeserved death. Literary criticism and archaeological research are interlinked. The one may illuminate workings and construction either intended or otherwise by an author. The other may reveal the workings of a civilization and construction techniques of a building. But the words of the author, however bland and trite, may reveal much about the civilization and culture of the society he is incidentally documenting. And the architecture of a ruined playhouse will give invaluable insight into the staging techniques and character of the plays performed there. The Ways of the Worlds. Hugo Dolthwaite, 2012. She was close to it. Camarina Lanik had been ploughing through the documents for almost a week, and at last she was within reach. She read through Clissolan's account of the Pentalanian festival again. There was something there hiding in his words, something that could fit the final piece into the puzzle. she looked up sharply as a shadow fell across the screen, throwing the lettering of the facsimile document into sharper relief against the illuminated background. The old man was leaning over her, his white beard almost touching her cheek. He smiled at her from point-blank range, and a silver salver appeared from nowhere beside her, a glass of wine reaching towards her poised hand. The old archivist straightened up as Lanik took the glass. He was still smiling, his face cracked open like a weather-weary statue. A smile of duty rather than displaying any genuine emotion, all part of the act. "Thank you, Elinico." She was not sure she wanted the wine. She resented the interruption. Elinico nodded. "With the compliments of Irving Braxiatel." He turned and left without waiting to see her surprise. Lanik watched him make his slow way down the long room back to his workstation near the entrance. Elinico's shadow followed him along the polished floor, darkening as he crossed the bands of sunlight which shone between the leaded glass of the high-curved ceiling. The researchers at the other desks along the length of the book-lined room ignored his progress, intent on the puzzles of the past rather than the enigma of the present. Lanik returned her attention to the screen in front of her. But the wine set beside it was a distraction. Why should she get special attention? Hardly anyone knew she was at the Braxiatel collection. Certainly she had not considered that its owner would acknowledge her presence. She sipped at the dry white wine, turning the delicate stem of the glass between finger and thumb as she examined the engraved pattern. A cluster of small leaves splaying out from a single branch. And as the tiny veins in the leaves caught the sunlight spilling from the windows above her, Camarina Lanik's mind slipped the final pieces together. Clissolan's account was the key. She had the size from the bill of materials, she had the shape from the DeWitt sketch. And now she could place it almost exactly from the journals of the transparent traders, coupled with Clissolan's description of the angle of the suns in the distant mountains. She knew where to find the ruins of the Pentalanian theatre on Monaxus. The glass hit the polished wood at an angle, wine spilling from the bowl even as it struck. The base remained almost intact, but the engraved bowl shattered, sending etched leaves of glass spinning and dancing across the floor as they were severed from the central stem. The Riparian defence sats around Gluvine were knocked out by the first salvo. The land-based surface-to-space missiles never got off the ground. The Haletian attack was as fierce as it was expected, but the Riparian division left to stave off the inevitable was ill-equipped and badly trained. The commander was slow to react, and in the 90 seconds it took for his officers to empower themselves to retaliate, the Haletian heavy landers broached the upper atmosphere and lost themselves in the ion layer. The garrison and munitions at Van Links was the main target, although, almost out of charity, a lander was also dispatched to the palace. The siege of Gluvine had lasted less than 7 minutes. As their advancing armada moved on towards Optron and Dorsardus, the Haletians hardly noticed that their outer markers also now encompassed the small uninhabited planet of Monaxus. They were in a mutually melancholy mood when they returned to the TARDIS. Neither would admit it, but they both missed Benny. "I think we need a break." The Doctor tossed his hat onto the central column and hurried round the console. Ace watched the hat rise and fall with the grating vibration of the engines. "Just us?" The Doctor glanced up from the console, apparently startled, and looked round as if to see who else might join them. After a moment, he broke into a wide smile. "Just us." He leaned forward and flicked a final switch. "I know a world where the wild time blows," he announced to an empty part of the TARDIS. "Excuse me?" He turned and stared at Ace for just long enough for it to be unsettling. Alternatively, he suggested, I know a place where the sun never sets. The British Empire? The doctor frowned, ignoring her. Or, to be more accurate, it's always setting. Oh. Ace was not impressed. I think we could both do with a sunset. He nodded. Yes, that's just what we need at the moment. Very fin de jour, very... He stared at the ceiling, searching for the word. Theatrical? Ace prompted. He seized on it immediately, ignoring her sarcasm. Yes, that's it. Theatrical. They do a good line in sunsets. And what's so great about sunsets? Ace wanted to know. The doctor beamed. I'll show you, he said, as the central column and the TARDIS gently came to rest.
Fantastic, and James will be back very soon. Now, we're going to take a look at the cover and discuss that, and speak to the artist about it. So, let's give another warm welcome to Jeff Cummins.
My name's Jeff Cummins. I'm an illustrator, artist, and I draw stuff, basically.
I really like Theatre of War. Again, another one with Sophie with that cracked sort of mud kind of look.
Oh, yeah.
That's a beaut.
Yeah. I quite like that one now. Whether I think I saw some... Was that actually filmed?
No, but there was the Big Finish did an audio version, and there was a photorealistic version of it.
That's what we're seeing.
By Will Brooks.
I think the muddy stuff on her hands looks more like a melted Mars bar or something. It's kind of weird. Sticky fingers. I call it sticky fingers these days. Try to sell it to Mick Jagger as an idea for the Stones. Something like that.
I'm glad you like it a bit more, because I think it's a lovely bit. I think it's so recognisable, the Soviet, and just that effect is so memorable, because when Will, who was doing the photo cover and putting the filters on it, he just said it was one of his favourites. So,
all right, cool, that's good.
So, we've now heard the Doctor Who magazine prelude for Theatre of War. We've heard from the cover artist. So why don't we learn a bit more about the background to the book? And we're going to be joined now by Julian Richards, the son of Justin.
Hello, I am Julian Richards, and I am the son of Justin Richards, who wrote Theatre of War.
Now, this is a book with quite an interesting history, because it wasn't sort of, wasn't just always Doctor Who, was it? It's got a bit of background to it.
It's a slightly complex thing. For me, reading Theatre of War, I read it sort of two times that matter. I read it once when I was sort of about 14, 15, and then I read it again when I was 21, at which point I went, no, hang on, this is my undergraduate degree. Because my father and I did the same undergraduate degree at the same university 30 years apart, which was the English and Theatre Studies undergraduate degree at the University of Warwick. For those of you keeping track of these things, the University of Warwick is where Jonathan Morris sets quite a lot of Touched by an Angel for Doctor Who purposes, so keep that in mind. And so I came back to Theatre of War having done this English and Theatre Studies degree and went, no, hang on. This is a novelised version of the 3-year undergraduate course I've just done. This is revision for me. I could use this for my final exams for the European Theatre module, and the way that the theory has been built into this, which also makes it led me to then re-examine System Shock, which is very much the novelisation of my dad's first job after that English and Theatre Studies degree. So that was interesting to see the extent to which Write What You Know is a launching point for these early novels. So Theatre of War in that regard, that's where it sort of sits and starts for me, and the way that I see the prehistory of the novel is sitting in seminars with Tony Howard and Carol Rutter and thinking, yeah, no, these are the exact seminars with the exact staff that led to this novel happening.
I think that reading it, it's an awful lot of people draw parallels between missing episodes when you've got the Good Soldier. And I think there's a lot more to it than that, I think it's fair to say.
Yeah, no, I think there's the stuff with the Good Soldier is always interesting, because what it hinges on is the idea that the theatrical innovations of the text are brilliant, and the text itself perhaps less so, which is very much an understanding coming from the sort of academic learning I was doing and that Dad was doing several decades prior, and the conversations I was having again with the same staff members who taught him in some cases, and the ways that all fits. But it's in conversation with Shakespeare and the idea of the lost play and how many plays of Shakespeare's contemporaries we don't have, and the question of what we've lost generally in media, which for us in Doctor Who will always come back to the lost episodes question. Although I don't think anyone's hoarding lost episodes as part of a plot to overthrow the government. At least I hope not, because there have got to be better ways of overthrowing the government.
If they are, of course, hoarding them and do plan to overthrow the government, give us both. No, can't say that. Outrageous.
Obviously outrageous. Could you not do these two things as separate enterprises? Yeah. Return the missing episode, then overthrow the government, whichever government it may be.
Exactly. Always good. And get in there, since Andrew Cartmel wanted to do it, so make his wish come true.
It's in line with the premise and the ideas of the show to overthrow whichever government you happen to be standing next to at the time, but do you have to withhold Doctor Who to achieve that?
Exactly. So you were mentioning European theatre. Could you maybe tell us a wee bit more about that for those who aren't aware of how that sort of feeds into the book?
So the book is littered with sort of pseudo-academic excerpts that are revealed later on to be part of the schemes and plans being put in motion, all of which read like the kind of material that I was reading as the secondary reading for the degree and the understanding. There's an extended section in particular talking about the Oresteia and the piloted speech that begins "What of the Gods," which is the first, or close to the first time, that 3 actors are ever on stage at the same time instead of 2, and the way that the theatrical innovation shifts and changes things. And the focus of the English and Theatre Studies course at Warwick since its inception has always been on the way that theatre manifests in performance, the relation between text and performance, and the fact that these are theatrical texts rather than simply literary texts. When I studied Shakespeare there, the module was split into 2 separate pathways, which were referred to as Shakespeare with chairs and Shakespeare without chairs, which basically meant, do you want to work this in a workshop position, getting it up on its feet and seeing how it works and building it that way, or do you want to take the literary academic approach? And the English and Theatre Studies undergraduates weren't given a choice. We were without chairs all the way. And so that understanding that the texts are meant for performance feeds into all of the stuff that Benny does in the archive at the theatre department at the Braxiatel collection, of understanding that this theatre doesn't work, that it's not built for an audience, the acoustics are all wrong, and also into the understanding of why The Good Soldiers is remembered as revolutionary and the things it does and changes, and why it's... I'm trying to think if there's a Doctor Who specific equivalent, and there is, but it's one that doesn't pay off. It's the equivalent of the universe in which Underworld defines the rest of the show, and everything is done on CSO from then on because it revolutionizes our understanding of technology. It's that moment of, oh, we can do this! This is possible! And that sort of theatrical realization, again, ties back to the Oresteia. Oh, you can have 3 people talking! And the shock of that moment of a figure who is meant to be mute suddenly speaking, and the extra weight that gives the speech. So that's sort of the ways that it feeds in and understands, and also just the raw mechanical understanding of how theatres work, how theatre academia works, and how many people involved in theatre academia want to use theatre to overthrow the government, because Andrew Cartmel is not an outlier in the arts.
That really sort of makes sense to me. I'm really sort of, following it now. And the Underworld simile is, or analogy I should say, is fantastic. That's just, oh God, there's a thought.
I'm sure there's a better one for an episode that does actually change your understanding of how the show is made, and everything else follows from it. But in terms of the sort of raw, it's a pure technical thing, not a scripting thing. Underworld is the sort of, we're going to try something completely revolutionary moment.
And talking of revolutionary moments, Braxiatel, the fact that he's arrived here, and how little did we know that he was going to become such a major player in bits of the Doctor's life, and of course, in particular, with Benny.
Yes, so obviously he's a throwaway line in City of Death, is the origin point for this, and Dad needed an academic figure. In terms of the man himself, obviously he has gone on to do many and varied things under many ranges and in many forms, most of them the form of Miles Richardson, who does a phenomenal job as him whenever he pops up. The initial conception, as I understand it, was sort of following on from Battlefield in an extent, because in Battlefield, Baranovich reaches the conclusion that the only person you can trust to reliably outsmart Sylvester McCoy is the Doctor from further into the future. So when you hit that problem again of who do you have that can put the Doctor on the back foot and have the turn and reveal of, no, Doctor, you haven't worked this out, someone else has been manipulating you the whole way through. And Dad's response to this was, well, if we treat the Doctor as Sherlock Holmes, there is a Mycroft Holmes somewhere. There is a figure who takes a step back, is nowhere near as involved, can do everything the Doctor does when he can be bothered to, and does so from a position of authority against which the Doctor is more jovially rebelling than he is the rest of Time Lord society. And that then obviously leads to certain almost realizations towards the end of the Benny novel range, which then almost get stated out loud in Gallifrey Disassembled, and which everyone knows, but I don't know if I can say.
Do it.
Okay, so the Mycroft Sherlock Holmes connection is a deliberate, this is an older brother figure to the Doctor, and there is no reason why it should be avoided, other than we don't like saying out loud things about the Doctor's past, that Braxiatel is the Doctor's older brother.
Fingers crossed. I love it. That's brilliant. Any other notes of interest that you've been able to find when looking through these?
Nothing in particular, because Theatre of War is sort of early enough that it predates the archive materials I've got access to and can get my hands on here, and sort of emerged fully formed. There's not a lot of early planning for it. It was very close to the initial pitch that Dad sent in, and what changes were made largely get changed back in the audio adaptation. It's mostly just how Benny gets involved, from turning up with the TARDIS team as opposed to as in the novel, having been there from previous adventures and calling them in.
Fascinating. And of course, the audio version, having mentioned it, what a delight that is. It's a real pleasure to listen to.
Yeah, no, the audio version is great, particularly with the sort of limitations it's working with of no one at any point ever explaining whether the rest of the new adventures have happened around it. So I think Dad talks about it in the special features on it. Not knowing how old Ace is and whether or not she's had her time away from the TARDIS, he has to try and not quite fudge it, but ride it as close to a halfway house, which sort of works because the novel version of Ace in Theatre of War is less controversial than some of the novel decisions made around Ace at the time. I think I'm fair to say. It's closer to a conception of Ace as she is at the end of Survival than it is to some of the versions of Ace that appear post Love and War, whilst still acknowledging and allowing for growth in that way. You could read it without having read Love and War and see how Ace got there in a way that some of the other stories written at the time are dependent on the developments that have happened in Love and War to reach that point of characterization that continues sort of all the way through to No Future.
Fantastic. Brilliant stuff. Julian, thank you so much.
Not at all. Thank you for having me on.
We're now going to hear from Julian's dad, the author, Justin. This interview was recorded at the audio adaptation of Theatre of War, when Justin was interviewed by the producer, Cavan Scott.
My name's Justin Richards, and I wrote the novel Theatre of War, and I've now adapted it for the audio version, which is very exciting.
So, thinking back to the original novel, can you sort of remember the origins of the tale?
Yeah, vaguely. I wanted to do something. I was thinking of pitching something when Benny had just become the new companion in the Virgin New Adventures books. So I wanted to do something related to archaeology, because apart from her first story, it seemed like she didn't get to do much archaeology, and as she's an archaeologist, that seemed a bit of an oversight, really. So I started from thinking about an archaeological dig on another planet, and sort of progressed it from there.
And so, at that point, you didn't know that Ace was going to be back in it then, I assume?
I think I probably did, actually. Right. Yes, I think I knew it was Ace and Benny when I wrote the pitch, which was just an unsolicited submission to Virgin. So I wrote them quite a detailed outline. I forget exactly how long, and some sample text, the first few chapters. Yeah, and the only change they wanted was actually at the very beginning, which meant I had to rewrite those sample chapters, because in the previous book, which was Legacy by Gary Russell, Benny goes off at the end with some ice warriors for some reason I can't remember. So I had her in the TARDIS with Ace and the Doctor at the beginning of Theatre of War, so I had to take her out and have some way of them getting back together, getting reunited. So I had Benny going off on the expedition to Manaxus, and for the audio, interestingly enough, I've put it back as it was because we don't have Legacy immediately before, so Ben is in the TARDIS at the beginning, so that wasn't quite as difficult as it might have been, given that I'd already sort of done that once anyway.
Thinking back to the New Adventure writers, I mean, were you in contact with each other? Obviously you said you didn't know that was happening in Gary's book, but were you in contact and sort of discussing things and the series as a whole?
Well, I did know it was happening in Gary's book, but I didn't know when I pitched it. So, because I didn't know, if they were going to take it up, or if they did, where they'd slot it into their run. So, but yes, most of the New Adventures were written by people I knew from Doctor Who fandom and working on Doctor Who magazine and various other things, like Gary and Andy Lane, who wrote All Consuming Fire, which I think follows on, and Paul Cornell, and yeah. So most of us did know each other, which I think was I'm not sure if it was an amusement or a frustration for Peter Darvill-Evans and Rebecca Levine at Virgin. I remember Gary ringing me up and saying that Peter had spoken to him and said, I found this great new writer I'm going to use, his name's Justin Richards, you won't know him. And Gary said, oh, Justin, yeah, no, I know him.
So how did you get involved in the first place with the New Adventures?
I just pitched an idea. Andy Lane I was at university with, he was a year below me at Warwick University, and he and Jim Mortimer wrote Lucifer Rising, and I thought, not wishing to diminish his contribution, I thought, well, if Andy can do it, then I can certainly have a go. So and I was employed as a writer anyway, a technical writer, writing computer software manuals and advertising copy and marketing blurb and all sorts of stuff, so I didn't know how to write. So I put together a pitch and sent it in, and sort of received wisdom was that nobody got commissioned for the first thing they sent in, or if they did, then it was going to be hugely changed. And no, they got back to me fairly promptly and said, yes, we'll do this. And the only change they wanted, as I say, was to take Benny out of the TARDIS at the beginning and have her join them a bit later on. So it went very smoothly from my point of view. Yeah, so I'm sure there's a lot of luck involved.
But there was a real sense at the time of, obviously the show was off the air, no one knew what the future Doctor Who was going to be, but there was an excitement about the New Adventures, wasn't there?
There was, yeah, because they well, as the name implies, they were new and they were different, and I guess because of the length of the books, I mean, they were like 85, I think Theatre of War is over 90,000 words long. There's a lot that happens in them. They are, I mean, the slogan was wider and deeper than the small screen or something like that, and they were. There's an awful lot you can do in a novel that you can't do on television, and which hadn't really been done very much in the novelizations of the TV shows. There are a few that delve deeper into the stories than the others, but by and large they're just retellings. Something like David Whittaker's first Dalek book, for example, is very different, but it was the very first novel, so you sort of understand that, and occasionally you get others along the way, and I suppose it was moving in that direction a little bit with the later ones, like Mark Platt's novelisation of Battlefield and so on, and Ben's Remembrance of the Daleks.
How much freedom did you have writing the New Adventures? It seems to be a case where there was lots of experimentation going on, but did you have much freedom what you could do or what you couldn't do?
Yes, actually. I don't remember being told I couldn't do anything. I suppose I had a reasonably good idea of what was allowed, if you like, when I wrote the outline. So there was nothing in there that that was too controversial. So no, I don't remember being asked to change anything for any reasons other than normal editorial reasons to do with making the narrative work and keeping the characters consistent and cutting it back a bit, because the first draft was, I think, over 100,000 words long, so I had to cut 10,000 words from it, which is just, the process of tightening things up. Even now I still tend to write things longer than they should be and then cut them back. I think that's better than trying to pad things out.
And obviously you didn't know at the time it was going to lead to a career for you, really, in this line of work.
No, I didn't. I'd always wanted to be a writer, and I was working as a writer, as I say, at the time, although in a different sort of area. And writing fiction was something I wanted to get into, so this was a good way of doing it. It's a shame it's not a way that is so easily available anymore. But yeah, so I did Theatre of War, and then I did another couple of Virgin books. I didn't do another New Adventure, strangely. I don't know why, but they wanted to do me to do a missing adventure, so I did System Shock, and then I did the Sands of Time, which was a follow-up to Pyramids of Mars, which worked very well. Yeah, and then we all went off to BBC Books and did similar sort of things there, only for a different regime.
And looking back at the book as well, it obviously introduced Brax into... Well, obviously Brax has been mentioned before in Doctor Who.
Yes, it was just picking up on a throwaway line in City of Death, where Romana mentions the Braxiatel collection, and I thought it's like all Douglas Adams' names, it's a terrific name, and I thought, I wonder what it is, and I needed an archive museum type place, and it just seemed like picking up on something that had been mentioned in the series gives it a bit of validity rather than making up something completely new. And then I thought, well, somebody has to be in charge, and presumably if it's the Braxiatel collection, it's owned by somebody called Braxiatel or endowed by or whatever, so let's have him as a character. I gave him a first name of Irving because the book is to do with theatre, so Irving is a good theatrical name, so we'll go with that. Although most of the other characters are named after archaeological sites, just because character names are very difficult, so going through an encyclopedia of archaeology and picking out names of archaeologists was a good way of finding names. Yeah, and yes, I think Braxiatel pops up and is mentioned in the previous book, Legacy, just by way of tying in with Theatre of War, but really it's his first proper appearance. Yeah.
And his relationship to the Doctor developed somewhat as well.
Yes, it's rather vague. I didn't really have any idea of, apart from the fact they knew each other and Braxiatel was quite probably a Time Lord, I didn't have any grand scheme for who he really was. Yeah, I didn't resolve that really until Tears of the Oracle, which was a New Adventure, Benny New Adventure rather than Doctor Who New Adventure, which was written supposedly to be the last of them. Although the last few that Virgin did sold so well, they then commissioned another 3, which I wrote one. So you can read it as the very last one ever, which is how it was intended. But there are more afterwards.
And then Brax would move across to the Big Finish line for
he did,
Benny.
Yeah. Although strangely, the first Benny of mine that was adapted for audio is Dragon's Wrath, in which Braxiatel plays a large part, and he doesn't appear in the audio. He's been edited out by on the orders of whoever produced it, Gary Russell, I guess, and the adaptation was by Jack Rayner, and it's very good, but it doesn't have Braxiatel in it.
But then when the Benny series sort of had its reboot right at the beginning of Big Finish, it was set in the Collective, and were you involved in that as well, sort of the setting up the idea of the Collective and what was there?
No, I wasn't. I've not been involved in the Benny side of Big Finish very much at all, apart from them adapting Dragon's Wrath, and I got to see the script, and I think I rewrote one scene in it which I felt needed tightening up for some reason or something, but it was very good. The only other involvement I've had was I did write the first of the Big Finish Benny books, the Doomsday manuscript, And then I've recently written Benny Audio, which is the first one I've ever done properly for, I can't remember what it's called now, Vaults of Osiris, I think. Or something. No, the Vaults of Isis. I don't know.
We'll look it up on the Big Finish.
Yeah, it's anyway, it's coming out soon. It's going to be very good.
A huge thanks to Big Finish for that, and we'll hear more from Justin later about adapting his book into an audio. Now, back in Doctor Who magazine issue 221, Justin spoke about writing his first Doctor Who novel in the feature Writing New Who, where he was interviewed by his old pal Craig Hinton, and we're now going to hear a reading of that with James Hadron Bennett telling us what Justin said then.
May saw the debut of Justin Richards' Theatre of War, a multi-levelled book that combined the concepts of both theatre and conspiracy. Theatre of War, explains Justin, was really an amalgamation of ideas. I started with the notion of the dream machine and the image of the final play in the book. And there's the poem of Auden's, As I Walked Out One Morning, which captures the essence of what I wanted the final performance to be about. Basically, it talks about how time will get us all in the end. From that basic start, I constructed a story to explain what the machine was and why it was there. Then I decided that was boring, and it would be much more interesting if that was actually what everyone thought was the case, but that the truth was actually quite different. So then I had to work out what was really going on. Theatre of War constantly challenges the reader's assumptions. Was that deliberate? I've always been a fan of thrillers, and there were a couple of tricks I wanted to play. The first was to tell the reader right at the start what's happening, and then let them forget that they know it. Too clever perhaps, and I'm not convinced it really worked. The other trick gets back to what I was saying earlier, to have a situation where all the evidence can be interpreted in a particular way, and then we get just one more simple clue which turns everything on its head. I think that works rather better. Then, just in case anyone was clever enough to put the two tricks together and work out what was happening ahead of time, I added a twist right at the end. With that, I wanted a situation like Philip K. Dick's Ubik, where the last scenes make you suddenly realise that you may have misinterpreted the whole thing right from the start. After all that effort, was he happy with the final result? Very, he confirms. It was a complicated book to write. There are layers to it. My intention was to write a book you could read several times and still get something out of. So even if you know what's going on and what the twist is, you can still read back through, see the clues, and reinterpret the evidence. The source documents are the most explicit evidence. On reflection, I should have scattered them more, rather than having one between each chapter. That set a precedent that I'm not sure stands up. Some of the ones towards the end are a bit contrived. The hardest part, though, was getting going. The very start was worst, but getting an angle on any section, a chapter or even a paragraph, is a slog. Then it's hard to keep going. The easiest thing was the research. Research is fun, and you don't have to produce any immediate result. You can watch a film or read a book or visit a house and kid yourself it's research. And maybe it is. But you shouldn't just throw stuff in because you researched it. That's an easy trap to fall into. You can see that in some books. For example, I've just read Thunderpoint and immediately knew that Jack Higgins had been diving. In Theatre of War, it was even easier, as I knew most of the theatre stuff already from my degree. Due to the success of Theatre of War, Justin now has a missing adventure due next year. System Shock is rather more straightforward than Theatre of War. One reason is that the missing adventures are supposed to be good old-fashioned yarns. Another is that I had 5 months to write Theatre of War and had already been thinking about it, and had some written as part of my initial proposal for Virgin. System Shock's been a 4-month turnaround. And that, together with a full-time job and a full-time family, just isn't enough time for a novel of the same internal complexity. But maybe that's a benefit. I think that System Shock will be more accessible as a result. After that, I've got some plots for novels which need working up. Missing, new, and non-Who stuff. Time will tell.
Justin also discussed writing Theatre of War with Simon Guerrier, and this is the whole feature that appeared in Bernice Summerfield, The Inside Story.
May's book was by another newcomer. At least Justin Richards was a newcomer to fiction. I was a writer at the time, but a technical writer at IBM, he says. I was doing computer user guides and stuff. In fact, I was just moving on from that to user interface design and advanced technologies, so I wanted to keep writing. I don't know how much Virgin actively encouraged new writers, but they certainly looked at stuff that we sent them. There were clear guidelines on how to submit material, so I sent them a synopsis and a 5,000-word sample first chapter. That first proposal was what became Theatre of War. Gary Russell told me that Peter Darville Evans was going to commission me, says Richards. He'd seen Peter at some convention over the weekend, and he had just commissioned Legacy. Peter said, "Oh, I found this new writer that you won't know." Like Russell, Richards had been part of the fanzine community that had honed Doctor Who fans' writing skills during the 1980s. Unlike Russell, it was seeing his contemporaries getting commissioned that convinced Richards to try his luck. I was spurred on by the fact that Andy and Jim had Lucifer Rising, he says. I was at university with Andy. He was a year below me, but we knew each other through the Science Fiction Society. It sounds a bit unfair to say I thought that if he could do it, I could, but it was sort of like that. Had he not known Paul Cornell back in the old days too? Even then, Paul was a talent that you aspired to rather than emulated, says Richards. When Andy did it, I thought probably rather arrogantly, I know Andy's quality of writing, and I can at least approach that. The book was received very favourably. Justin has drawn the regulars to perfection, said his former IBM colleague Craig Hinton in DWM number 212. Especially Benny, who is the focus of a large part of the book, thank goodness. Indeed, the Doctor and Ace don't even appear for the first 50 pages. I'm pretty sure my first thoughts and notes didn't include Benny, says Richards. Then when Benny was announced and there was an article about her in Doctor Who magazine, she fitted into the story because it was about archaeology. I thought, I need to make something of this. If I'm quick, I'll be there before anybody's written much for Benny, so I put her into it. In the original synopsis, though, Benny arrived with the Doctor, doing, Richards says, all the stuff that I'd given a character called Slavich. I think. I changed all the names at one stage, so I may be giving you the old name. What other names did he change then? Lanik was originally called Mitchell, and she still is in one of the editions of the Virgin Doctor Who programme guide, which included synopses of the new adventures. Anyway, Slavich was the archaeologist with the group, and what she does is really what Benny did. I already had the situation where she went off to the Braxiatel collection to do a bit of research, and then came back with some answers. The Braxiatel collection was a fanish in-joke. In the 1979 Doctor Who story City of Death, the Doctor and his companion Romana discuss art galleries that compare to the Louvre in Paris. The collection is one of those mentioned, though as Alan Barnes pointed out in his Fact of Fiction feature in DWM number 350, City of Death script spelt it Braxiatel. It was a plot device, admits Richards. But Gary Russell soon changed that, and in so doing, boarded out one of the most important of the new adventures' shared characters. Gary had this notion that Benny was going to go off and do something else at the end of Legacy, says Richards. He wasn't sure what, but he fancied her going off with an Ice Warrior, for some fetishistic reason. Richards decided that the Ice Warrior would take her to the Braxiatel collection in time for the start of his book. In doing so, he says, it was legitimate that she went back there to do research later because it was somewhere she already knew. Having done that, I needed to make more of the Braxiatel collection rather than it just being this big library where she turns up, reads a few books, and then goes away again. I thought, why is it called the Braxiatel collection? If it's called the Braxiatel collection, let's have a guy called Braxiatel. We'll give him the first name Irving because it's also tied up with theatre as well as history, and Irving's a good theatrical name. And there he is. The first bit I wrote with him is the bit where Benny meets him in the Garden of Whispers. This scene is included in the script of The Wake, the Bernice audio play released in December 2007. Brax is played by Miles Richardson. As much as anyone, I had Julian Glover in mind, says Richards. Glover had played the villain in City of Death, a one-eyed green Jaggeroth called Skaroth, who disguised himself as the suave Count Scarlione. Brax is a sort of nice Scarlione, very well read, but alien and different. As the book progressed, so did Braxiatel's character, and his background. If you just leave him as the figurehead of the organisation, says Richards, that's a bit bland and boring. He needs to do something as well. If my original synopsis had a fault, it was that the Doctor's opponent was not his enemy. Brax is not really an enemy as such, but he does ultimately beat the Doctor. The story follows an archaeological dig on Menaxus, which unearths a projector still containing recordings of infamous lost plays. But the projector is a fake, planted there to entice and then kill the leaders of the planet Helacia. I was going to call it plot device at one point, says Richards, because that's what the machine is. Originally, it was centuries old. Bringing it up to date and having someone behind it, in opposition to the Doctor but not actually on a different side, meant there was more for him to do. It makes the threat more personal and immediate. In making Braxiatel a fellow Time Lord, and one maybe a bit smarter than the Doctor, was Richards also influenced by the next book in the series? Andy Lane's All-Consuming Fire had the Doctor meeting Sherlock Holmes, and his smarter, more devious brother, Mycroft. I don't think that was conscious either way, says Richards. It was a coincidence. I rationalised where Brax came from afterwards. I certainly knew what their relationship was before I wrote anything else.
Again, big thanks to James for his reading and to Simon for letting us quote that text. Now, you heard some of the reviews in reaction to Theatre of War there, but before we hear what was said in the contemporary review in full, let's have a second reading from the book. And again, this is courtesy of James. He really should be my co-host in this episode, but he's recorded from afar and we're dropping him in. So over to you, James.
Ace was waiting for him when the Doctor emerged from the TARDIS. It was back in the Lander's hold, and Ace assured the Doctor that it had not been missed. "They're too busy chasing after Tashman's hand. I said I'd stay and finish working out the controls." "What happened to Tashman's hand?" "It's only he's on a sort of finders keepers basis." The Doctor was still confused. "You mean he found a hand?" "Oh yes, in the mud." The Doctor seemed unenlightened. "He thinks there's a whole arm in there," she offered helpfully. "In the where?" "In the mud, on the stage, where we arrived, or whatever it was we did." The Doctor pondered for a moment, his eyes defocusing and his face slackening slightly. Then he blinked and fixed Ace with a steady stare. "The stage, yes, that will be the focal point." "Focal point?" "The most dangerous area, if I'm right." "Come on." if you're not right?" Ace asked him as they ran to the tunnel. The Doctor stopped in mid-step, and Ace went flying past as the law of momentum refused to stop. She stopped as soon as she could and waited for the Doctor to walk up to her. He wore a hurt expression. "I'm always right," he told her, shouldering his umbrella and marching off down the tunnel. They could see the archaeologists crowded round the stage. In the middle of the little crowd was the side of the huge mass of mud. It was only 2/3 its original size, the steps having taken the rest. And in the otherwise smooth-cut side was a rough indentation where Tashman had gouged out the dirt. From the middle of the resultant crater protruded what looked like a human hand. The Doctor assumed control as soon as he was on the stage. Before long, he had them all gathered round as he examined the hand, pushing the mud back from the wrist with a scalpel that had mysteriously appeared in his grasp at some point. Tashman leaned forward to see what the Doctor was up to now. He appeared to be examining the edge of a cuff attached to the hand's wrist. I thought about blasting away the remainder of the mud with the water cannon, but it might damage the stone, if it is stone. Oh, it's stone all right. The Doctor seemed preoccupied. He scraped more mud away and fixed a jeweller's glass in one eye. He prodded at the hand's wrist, moved round to give himself better light from the distant lamps which Tashman and Crane had set up earlier, and frowned in concentration. After a long moment he looked up, the jeweller's glass dropping into his open hand, and from there into his jacket pocket. He stared round at everyone. Ace could see him looking carefully at their arms. Suddenly, he caught hold of Banner Hilk's jacket sleeve and pulled it towards him. Shocked, Banner Hilk took a step forwards. But the Doctor dropped his arm in disgust and disappointment. He sat down heavily on the edge of the stage, unhooking his umbrella from his wrist resting on the theatre floor and leaning his hands on it in front of his face. This brought his cuffs level with his eyeline, and Ace saw him do a prize double take. Then he was on his feet again, his eyes sharp with worry. "Tashman!" he called across the stage. Tashman turned in response, and the Doctor's instruction was clear and loud. "Do it!" They cleared the stage and sat on the tiered steps of the auditorium as Banner Hilk and Tashman adjusted the angle and range of the jets. "What's going on?" asked a voice from close behind Ace. She looked round to find Fort Alexa standing behind her. She told him, "It'll be a washout," he responded immediately, and she grimaced. "How are you getting on with the machine?" "Not bad, I suppose. I know exactly how to work it." "But?" She could tell from his voice that there was a but. "But I need the activator key." "And you don't have one?" Fort Alexa shook his head. "No, I don't. So, keep your eyes open." He slumped down beside her. "Where's your friend, Professor Summerfield?" Ace was not sure what she should tell him, so she asked instead, "What does this key look like?" He seemed not to notice the change of subject. "It's a rectangular card with an internal magnetic strip, probably plastic, about so wide." He held the thumb and forefinger of his right hand about as wide apart as they would go to demonstrate. "I'll keep a lookout," Ace told him, but her words were drowned out by the sound of water jets hitting the wall of mud and burrowing inside it. The Doctor was on his feet and staring towards the stage even before the jets had stopped. They could all see the three figures standing on the stage, vague shapes through the haze of water droplets, but distinct enough to be discernible, characters waiting for a cue that would never come. Ace joined the Doctor at the edge of the stage. The mist was clearing a little now, and she could begin to make out more detail in the figures. They were posed unnaturally upright like typical stone statues. But there was something more familiar about them. 2 female, 1 male. Strangely, she recognized the least familiar one first. The rightmost figure was Lannick. She had seen this herself and was standing beside Ace, her mouth open in surprise. On Ace's other side, the Doctor nodded grimly. And at last, Ace recognized the other 2 stone figures. One was herself, and the other was the Doctor.
Thank you once again for that, James. Now, let's turn to the pages of Doctor Who magazine issue 212. And in this, the reviewer was Craig Hinton, who we mentioned earlier as he interviewed Justin, and let's find out what he thought of his pal's novel. This review followed up Gary Russell's Legacy, so let's see what it said. While the Federation enjoys a period of peace and prosperity, another part of the galaxy is prospering in a more violent way, as the Helician Empire's expansion into the Riparian cluster continues. Meanwhile, a team of archaeologists on the planet Menaxis is forced to withdraw on the verge of the greatest discovery of their careers. But Camarina Lannick is determined to return. 5 years later, the Empire is losing, but she's able to put together another expedition to Menaxis, now on the front line. But this time, one of the archaeologists is Professor Bernice Summerfield. To understand why Benny is often her own gives too many clues as to the end of Legacy, so read that book and find out. Suffice to say that Menaxis is rather more lively than most archaeological sites. After an ancient curse, Benny is intrigued, and the TARDIS's arrival in what appears to be a replay of Hamlet adds to the mystery. But things really hot up with the discovery of an advanced holographic projector programmed with a library of history's greatest plays, including one thought lost forever. And when events suggest that an ancient curse is upon them, the time has come to take the results back to Helicia. Is Menaxis the archaeological find of the millennium, or is it all part of a much greater and more deadly production? Justin Richards is a stalwart of virtually every Doctor Who magazine ever, and he brings his knowledge of literature and drama to Theatre of War, May's new adventure, and it's outstanding, especially Jeff Cummins' striking cover. If Legacy is light entertainment, then Theatre of War is high drama. You cannot afford to miss a single word, as it shifts from murder mystery to space opera to political intrigue within the space of a few pages. Justin has drawn the regulars to perfection, especially Benny, who is the focus of a large part of the book, thank goodness. But his own characters occasionally lack direction and intent, sometimes becoming indistinguishable. The notable exceptions are Lannick, the chief archaeologist, and Marlock, the truly evil Eminence Grease, who really rules the Helician Empire. And a mention must go to the mysterious Irving Braxiatel, whose motivation is the best kept secret in his collection. The background to the Helician Empire is magnificent, a culture totally obsessed by theatre. Titles, swear words, the whole way of life is dedicated to the pursuit of the theatrical, and this makes the fascination with the discovery of a long-lost play all the more believable. And there are definitely parallels to be drawn with the discovery of a certain Doctor Who story a few years ago. One of the major themes of the novel is deception, and as the book progresses, the true nature of the theatre-loving Helicians is a quite disturbing revelation. If I have any criticisms of Theatre of War, they are aimed at the depth of the book. A casual reader might get a bit lost by the sheer volume of theatrical references, and they occasionally give the book a rather heavy feel, but this can also be seen as a bonus. The book definitely deserves a second reading to pick up all the references. Theatre of War is definitely one of the best books in the series, and I look forward to reading more from the pen of Mr. Richards. Well, that's really nice. Well done, Craig. Thank you. With hindsight, we can see that the DWM 265 poll of all the new adventures showed that Theatre of War came 28th, which was sitting ahead of Head Games in 29th, First Frontier in 30th, Time Worm Revelation in 31st, and Iceberg was 32nd. And Theatre of War had a score of 68.49% from 1,060 votes. Let's get some up-to-date reviews to see how people think of Theatre of War today. And as ever, we're looking at Goodreads, where Theatre of War has a rating of 3.62 from 247 ratings and 22 reviews. Of these, 5-star 21%, 4-star 32%, 3-star 34%, 2 stars 10%, and 1 star 1%. Here's a 5-star review from Chris. This is probably the first Doctor Who novel that stands up as a great piece of science fiction on its own. Cornell's earlier works are also brilliant, but very tied to Doctor Who history and the ongoing arcs. This explores the power of theatre and its different traditions, the value of memory over actual performance in both a historical and Who context, and what is a necessary act to stop evil. At the same time, it also has brilliant character work, great scares, and introduces some important points for going forward. Highly recommend it, even if you're not a Doctor Who fan. There's a 5-star review from Laura. Genuinely can't put into words why I enjoyed this book so much. I mean, I can see why I enjoyed it. It's well written, Justin Richards is good at characterisation for the core group, I like the use of source documents and fake quotes. But why I enjoyed it more than any other good VNA, I couldn't say. Anyway, it was good, I liked it. Maybe it turns out I'm a sucker for Doctor Who and theatre. 4-star reviews from City Mist. An extremely entertaining and surprisingly influential debut for author Justin Richards. Elements of this plot are clearly reflected in Stephen Moffat's work for New Who, particularly in Silence of the Library, Forest of the Dead. 3 stars from Finlay O'Riordan, who said, continuing directly on from Legacy, we have the first Doctor Who story to feature Irving Braxiatel in a proper capacity. Sure, there's not a lot to learn about him here, and is really only interesting looking back after reading to additional material featuring him, but as a closed-off story, this one is pretty decent, with some creepy images, such as the mud-based Ace facsimile. I don't know why, if maybe it was just the fairly limited setting, or some hard-to-imagine scene descriptions, but I found the book to be slightly mundane after a while. And finally, here's a 1-star review from Numa Parrott. Always entertaining as our Numa. Reading this was torture, and I did make it all the way to the end with minimal skimming. The writing was horrible, the plot was completely uninteresting, the local characters were flat and boring, the clay monsters were a little bit scary, I suppose. Nah. Thank you, Numa. Now, of course, the story of Theatre of War doesn't end there, because in December 2015, Big Finish announced the story, and the one which followed it, All Consuming Fire, would be adapted as full cast audios. And at the time, producer Cavan Scott had asked around various fans who he knew who had read the NAs, including yours truly, to gauge the popularity of various titles, and he commissioned some of the most popular of them all. And when I asked him why he chose Theatre of War, Cav told me in Vortex, Theatre of War introduces Irving Braxiatel. It was just too tempting. Benny and Brax together for the first time, well, the first time for Benny at least. Lisa and Miles are so good together with so much history. To hear them meet for the first time was fascinating. Indeed it was. Now before we continue, let's hear the Big Finish trailer for the audio adaptation.
Coming soon from Big Finish Productions, Doctor Who, Theatre of War.
Welcome to Manaxus. Or as close as you'll get away from the real thing.
This is amazing.
You expect us to believe that... Wait, it's you.
As usual, my reputation precedes.
Professor Summerfield. But how...
Kilmarnock! 4 statues that look exactly like the 4 of us. Intriguing, isn't it?
That definitely shouldn't happen.
They've detected us.
Weapon systems locking on. They're firing. Get us moving, now!
We have to save the machine.
A trick. A Ripperian trick.
Get me away from here! Guards!
Oh, how do I get into these situations? Strap in, Benny, strap in.
Now, Doctor, take the machine and go! Now! While you still can!
The rest is silence.
Big Finish. We love stories.
Well, that was exciting, wasn't it? Let's now go back and hear from Justin Richards about adapting his own work and how he did it.
And now you're back with Theatre of War, going right the way back to the beginning. What was the emotions when I sort of contacted you and went, hey, do you fancy doing it?
I thought it was a terrific idea. It's nice because it's so long ago that I could come to it fresh and new, and the way that I adapted it was nothing like what I thought I was going to do. I'd got the original file on the computer, and I thought, well, it's easy. I'll just go through, strip out all the description, and I'll have the dialogue left, and there we are. I've got a script, pretty much. And I didn't do that at all. It just looked too complicated for words. So what I did was I went back to the original outline I'd written, and I went through and I rewrote that as if it was an audio outline, and then I wrote it fresh from that outline. But for each scene that seemed a bit tricky, I went back to the book and read what happened there before writing the scene. So it was sort of... So I don't think probably a few bits that I did lift or copy, particularly towards the end in the theatrical performance and in the finale. But apart from that, I don't think I lifted dialogue particularly. Partly because the book is very wordy. Everybody talks a lot, and you haven't got time in a 4-episode story for that much going on. So plot-wise, it has to be simplified, and dialogue-wise, everybody has to be much more direct and pithy.
And were there any particular challenges in adapting it for audio?
It's quite a visual book, I think. So. Yes, but they're the usual challenges you have on audio. I think when I'm writing, I'm quite visual anyway, so I always find that a bit of a challenge. But yeah, having statues that come to life and ooze mud and whatever, which in the book I don't think say anything, or an army of robots appearing on stage who again say nothing, that sort of thing is quite tricky to get across without being too obvious and having people saying, oh look, that statue's moving, or oh my gosh, an army of robots has appeared.
So if you could go back and adapt any of your other Doctor Who novels from Virgin or BBC Books, which one would you choose?
Ooh, I don't know. I think they'd all offer challenges, but they'd all be fun to do. I think Sands of Time would be the most interesting to do. Yeah, and again, it's one. Well, I haven't read any of my books since sort of proof stage. I don't have time for one thing. There are so many other good books to read instead, and I know what happens. So that would be a good one. I'd love to do System Shock and Millennium Shock, but without Ian Marter to play Harry Sullivan, who's key to both those books. I think that would be very, very difficult and probably wouldn't work. But yes, Sands of Time. Out of the others, there's some that would work quite well, and some that probably wouldn't. Some of the BBC ones, when I was actually editing the range, are very much caught up in story arcs that were going on at the time. So finding one that's standalone is tricky. I think any of the new series ones would work quite well, but they bring their own problems, and most of them are out on BBC Audio as either abridged or full readings anyway. So
marvellous. I think that's everything I need. Thank you very much. Is there anything else you'd like to say about the book?
Don't think so.
You missed? No. Cool.
I thought it had a terrific cover.
Yeah, I'll show you the cover for this in a minute.
Oh, okay. I bet that's terrific too.
Again, thank you to Big Finish for allowing us to use that audio. Now, we're going to speak to the cover artist who brought this to life. We mentioned him earlier on when we were speaking to Jeff Cummins. So here, let's let him introduce himself. So Will, this must have been a bit of a joy for you, given that this is one of the most iconic and popular covers from Jeff Cummins' original. So tell us about the construction of it? Was it a case of, if we start with the Ace image, was it a case of find one that would work with sort of arms extended and then adding the relevant effects? I had no idea. My goodness, I'm just looking at it now and it's like, okay, yes, I had never noticed that. There we go. And then, of course, you had... oh, I can see it. You have a woman's hand, my lord. Of course, finding pictures of Lisa wouldn't be too difficult, obviously, with her being a photographer and having done several photo shoots. But then, of course, creating Sylvester to get that New Adventures
I'm
look.
Will Brooks, and I did the cover art for the Big Finish adaptation of Theatre of War. It really was. It was a case of, when they said Theatre of War, I didn't have to look it up because everyone knows the cover for that one. It's really striking. Some of the New Adventures covers are a little bit variable. Some are amazing, some are questionable, but the Theatre of War one is sort of top 5 iconic, I think, which is why I pretty much ripped it off for the adaptation. Expanded, but it was always going to have that image of Ace on there. Well, she's a complete Frankenstein, the Ace on there. The head is obviously Sophie from, I think, Greatest Show in the Galaxy. The body is Nicola Bryant. It's her in her Vengeance on Varos, sort of very tight suit. The arm is me, because of course it is. I couldn't find anything at the right angle. And so, yeah, it's my arm, my hand, and then Nicola Bryant's body, Sophie Aldred's head. It's the right Frankenstein's monster, that one. I've got very feminine hands. Yeah, he was. I think I've just been looking at the cover again. I think
of course,
the body
might be
me.
The theatre itself, the
The head
amphitheatre area.
is Paradise Towers.
Lovely,
it's a gorgeous shot of him from Paradise Towers.
There.
But I think the body, if it isn't me, then it might just be like a catalogue model or something in a linen suit. And then I photoshopped. I think the tie on there, I recreated the tie so that it's the pattern of his scarf that he wears normally with his costume. And it's a black and white image, so I had to colorise it, which I'm not normally very good at. But to toot my own horn, I think it stands up quite well on that one there. I'm quite pleased with that.
Just looking
and
at
it matches
of course,
the Lisa shot really well, because that was one of her Benny photo shoots.
Going for that sort of
I don't think they've done that long ago
sort of
at that point.
The
but then I was mortified, because originally
sort of just like
I took that photo shoot
sort of colour,
and I
so
photoshopped Lisa to look really, really young, because I was thinking this is earlier in Benny's travels, so it's long before this photo shoot, which is set however many years after she's left the Doctor. So I'd photoshopped it and I'd sent it off, and then it went off for approvals. And someone had told me that Lisa was really unhappy, because I think it was taken as like, why have you felt the need to Photoshop me so heavily? And I was mortified, because I love Lisa and I love Benny and I love all of that. And I thought, God. And so we tweaked it. I think we compromised. There's a little bit of photoshopping, but not as much.
You were doing it now?
And then I met her at a convention. We did a panel together for something or other. And I did say to her, look, I'm so sorry. I really didn't mean to offend. And she was lovely. She was kind of like, oh God, no, I wasn't offended at all. I was just questioning. And I tried to explain my reasoning, and she couldn't have been nicer. But I was mortified, because it was the first time I'd ever been able to do anything with Benny on. And I thought, I've shot myself in the foot here. Yeah.
actually was a decade ago.
Yeah, that's
December
just a stock image,
2015.
I think. I think I might have dirtied it up a little bit and chipped away at it a bit.
Try joining
And
my
it's
gang.
definitely
I
got a
bought out the book
replacement
when it came
sky.
out.
But it's one of those ones, it's quite fun because there's so many images in Theatre of War that are easy to draw on. And so when you think, right, I need a amphitheatre falling apart,
at the time you
that's
did
not
discover.
hard to track down and find a striking image for. Yeah, it came together quite nicely. I was particularly pleased, and I'd forgotten this until I looked at it today. There's a little Braxiatel collection ticket in there, and I made the ticket, and you can't see it on the finished cover, but the background of it is the Palace of Versailles, because the Braxiatel collection is modelled on the Palace of Versailles. And so I spent ages doing that ticket, and then it's about 2 millimeters wide on the cover, and you can't actually see it. But I know it's there, and I know the work that went into it.
Fantastic. Will, you're a star. Thank you so much. Now, let's
possibly.
Have a
I think it's a little sharp, perhaps in the cutting, and some of the images are a little clearer. These days I tend to do a lot more of, I lay it all out with photos, and then I overpaint it, and it softens the image, it ties everything together a little nicer. I wasn't doing that at this point. I mean, this must be 10 years ago, I should think. So I look at it and I sort of instantly go, oh, that's a bit sharp.
Of these books can't be denied.
No, I think compositionally, I'm quite pleased with that. I think it's one of my better Big Finish covers.
When the series returned to TV, if you squinted, you could see an occasional nod to the New Adventures.
I'm so old.
For many years, it felt like the long out-of-print range was buried. Fittingly, Theatre of War starts off with an archaeological dig.
I would have still been. No, I wouldn't have still been.
More ideas
but I
and
still would have been in
4
short
episodes
rounds
than you could shake a spade at. Adapted by Justin Richards from his 1994 novel, it's a classic new adventure and rips along at a rate of knots.
I sort of knew
opening with the mystery of the rain-lashed world Minaxis,
but for years I had no interest in the new adventures, and I've owned various ones here and there, and sold them on and got rid, and they've never appealed. And then for some reason, in the last couple of months, I've decided, no, I really want to read them, and so I've just bought pretty much all of them in the last 6 weeks or so, and I've about 5 or 6 books in, and I'm suddenly realising actually they're quite good. So I will make it to Theatre of War eventually, and I think I'm going to listen to the adaptations as and when I get to them. So that'll be quite fun.
The search for missing episodes and expectation versus reality. Just as this
Of
most
course,
manipulative
yes.
of all doctors thinks he's figured everything out, he's coolly informed that he's completely missing the point as the plot thickens further. It's as much Benny's story as the Doctor's.
Thank you.
She comes face to face with someone who will loom large in her future, one Irving Braxiatel, he of the collection, a man who goes way back with the Doctor. Long-time followers of Benny's adventures will be familiar with Benny's sparring with the urbane, devious Brax. Lisa Bowerman and Miles Richardson's relationship in audio is already well established, but it's good to finally see their first meeting and how Braxiatel outplots the Seventh Doctor. Sylvester McCoy and Miles Richardson only have a fairly brief meeting, but the edgy atmosphere between them hints at centuries of game playing and point scoring. It's not all about the Doctor and Benny's interactions with Braxiatel, though. There's a large cast of strong characters to contend with, including Kirsty Besterman's Steely Lanik and the foppish exec, played by Brian Dick. Next to the strong central turns from McCoy, Bowerman and Richardson, Ace loses out slightly. Sophie Aldred is as wonderful as ever and makes her presence felt in every moment, but the story focuses instead on Benny, who breezes through the story as if everyone else is the guest star. Theatre of War is a great adaptation of a fan favourite, revealing more with each listen. Buried treasure indeed. Hurrah! Martin liked it. So, that's us at the end. If you've enjoyed today's podcast, please do feel free to leave a review for us on your podcatcher of choice. Follow us on social media. We're on Twitter at Power of 3Pod with a number 3. We're on Blue Sky at Finished Zine. And we have a Facebook page too, where we'll be sharing bonus content like cover comparisons and so on and so forth. So, yeah. As always, we like to play out the tune. And long-term listeners will know I have a favourite group who I regularly slip in where possible. So today, I'm not going to break that rule. So to play out Theatre of War, we're going to listen to The Theatre by Pet Shop Boys from the 1993 album Very. I've been Kenny Smith, so until next time, this has been The Power of Three. Bye-bye.